Welcome in, folks, to the Barbecue for Newbies podcast. I'm your host, Kurt Mueller, and joined today by the Pitmaster from Hold Your Horses Barbecue, Mr. Cary Chasteen. He is out of Griffin, Georgia. He's actually coming to us from the road, headed up to Sevierville, Tennessee. Cary, thanks for joining us. How are you today?
Doing great. How about you?
Fantastic. I'm actually, if you can imagine, I'm barbecuing today for a campaign event that I'm having later tonight. So it never stops. So for our listeners, I actually was fortunate to get connected initially with Cary on Facebook, and then we finally met in person last weekend at the Boss Hog Cook-Off down in Waynesboro, Georgia. And Cary's been competing for a number of years. How long have you been competing, Cary?
I started in 2013 or 14 with just doing one contest a year for a local contest at home. And it was a GBA. And then 16, I started, I think I cooked 8. And by 17, I think we cooked 28. And it's just gone from there. Last year, I cooked 45.
45. So almost every weekend.
Well, out of that 45, I think 12 of those were doubles, so that helps.
It helps. That's right. That's exactly right. So you say we. Who else is on the team with you?
Well, I'm basically by myself most of the time. When I started, my nephew cooked with me a lot, and then some weekends I'm blessed to have my wife be able to travel with me, but like this weekend, she's pursuing her own endeavors with showing quarter horses this week. So she's gone to Conyers, Georgia to the International Horse Park to show. So it's just me and my dog, Kenny, who's in the back seat passed out.
I love it. I love it. So Cary is living the dream, as they say. I aspire to do what he does in retirement, is just travel the country and and cook barbecue in a parking lot. That's awesome. So first thing I always like to dive into and chat about is, the journey into competitive barbecue, because I'm always interested to hear, everybody's got a different journey, right? And it's very interesting to hear how we all got into this obsession, this hobby, whatever you want to call it, right? So how did you get into it? What was your journey like into competition barbecue?
Well, I grew up cooking a lot of barbecue with my dad. Every September, we would cook a whole hog for a big neighborhood to get together. And then we always cooked shoulders for selling barbecue for the local saddle club for the fundraisers. Then by the time I was 15, I was working for a barbecue restaurant and run the pit by the time I was 16. And so that's kind of where my background came from. And I grew up out in the country working in a butcher shop. Mondays and Tuesdays, we butchered hogs and cattle. And Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, we cut meat and processed. And I don't know, back in 14, I guess it was, my nephew talked me into going and cooking our local contest, which was a GBA event. And we finished very mid-pack and went back and did it again the next year. And we're a little better than mid-pack. And the next year, I decided if we're going to do this, we're either going to get better or quit. So I went to a couple of classes and we came back to Griffin again. And that time we got 7th in brisket, which in GBA, that was ancillary. And I beat Robbie because he got 10th. And that was kind of the start. Milledgeville, which used to be the state championship, was 2 weeks later. And that was only about an hour from the house. So I signed up to go. And lo and behold, we got our first finals call in pork. And I was so excited. We got in our pork call. We finished second. And I'm sitting there with Facebook trying to post my picture of my 5-foot trophy and my $600 check. And Robbie taps me on my shoulder and says, "You going to go up and get your 4th place call in ribs?" And I never even heard him. And walking back from awards that day, Brian Mizraki with Bull Rush was on his way to the Royal for a practice cook, wraps his arm around me walking back to the trailer and says, "Well, we got you reeled in hook, line, and sinker, and there's never been any truer words." And a few weeks later, I ordered my first barbecue trailer and been cooking ever since. And last year, I sold my business and retired, and that's all I've done since is cook barbecue.
That's awesome. So basically, you've been doing it your whole life is kind of your journey into it, and very similar to my journey into it, and very similar to a lot of other guests that we have on the show. It seems like it's one of those things that starts out as a hobby when they're young, and then it grows into a passion, and then
Oh, very much so.
And I'm sure you know good and well about the barbecue family that's out there, which is a pretty close knit group of folks, great people to hang around. So, I think the best part of that story is that you just said, to heck with it. Let's jump in with both feet and let's do this thing.
Yeah, I mean, I've never cooked a backyard event. Cooked pro from the word go, and every year I always take a class or two, and because you never stop learning, and we all start at A and we all end up at Z, but there's a million ways in between to get there.
That's a great point, and I think for those that are wanting to get into competitive barbecue, and looking at the backyard or the pro division, I think what Cary just said is gold, and that is just go all in, go pro from the word go, I think is what he said. And that's what we did. And you're gonna stumble, you're gonna make mistakes, but I think you learn a lot from that, over the long term.
No doubt you do, and the thing of it is, you always want to compete against the best you can, because otherwise you're never going to learn. If you're the small fish if you're the big fish in a small pond, you're never going to grow. That's my philosophy with it. It's always been that way when we showed horses. You always wanted to show against the toughest competition you could find, because that was the only way to improve yourself.
That's exactly right. Now, forget about competition for a second. Let's just talk about in general. What's your favorite cut of meat to cook?
Hands down, brisket.
Why is that? I'm curious.
Second would be tri-tip. I just love eating brisket, for one thing, and it doesn't hurt that I'm good at it.
That's good point. That's a good point. Now, are you a if you're cooking it at the house, what kind of brisket are you making? Are you doing it the hot and fast method? Are you separating it? Are you cooking the whole packer? I mean, what are you doing at the house?
At the house, I'm still going to separate.
Okay.
Just for the simple fact they're two different muscles and they cook differently.
Right.
And I really love a great burn in. I mean, you can cook them whole, and that's fine. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but I'm still going to separate them.
Right. And now, are you a believer in the hot and fast, or are you more the low and slow kind of guy?
No, I'm a convert to the hot and fast anymore. It started out when I first started competing. I was low and slow, and my problem with that was I'd come in from work on Thursday and try to pack up and go to a contest and get there on Friday, and hadn't had any sleep, and then prep all my meat on Friday when I got there, and then trying to run the pit all night, and that just didn't work. Eventually I gravitated over to cooking the more hot and fast, and when I went to a gravity fed, I found out I could go to sleep and let it cook overnight. But then when I went over to hot and fast, I wound up getting the same amount of sleep, because I got up at the same time as I would to wrap in the morning to light the fire. And I really like the texture and what it does with the meat hot and fast. It keeps it moisture.
Now, so when you say hot and fast, give me an idea. What are you running your pit temp at? 325, 350?
300 to 325.
Okay. And for our listeners,
and on brisket, I don't mind starting them at 350 and bringing them down.
And bring it down, right? And for our listeners, what you'll find when you hear somebody talk about hot and fast, usually that means above 300 degrees. And if it's low and slow, that's typically 275, 250 and below. So no right or wrong way to do it.
I can remember when 275 was considered very hot and fast.
Well, then if that's the case, what was low and slow? 200, 180?
225, yeah.
Yeah. It's amazing how barbecue has changed over the years. And, I'm kind of a nerd about the history behind it. And to see all these different cookers at a contest, it's almost overwhelming. So I'm curious from your side of things, if someone's listening to the show and they're wanting to get into competitive barbecue, what are some questions they need to be asking themselves when they're looking at smokers, right? Because there's so many of them and you got so many opinions out there.
Well, you just got to find something that works for you and learn the pit inside and out and know how to cook on it. If it's running hot, okay, just adjust your timeline to fit that. And the big thing is, I don't care what you cook on, you just got to know how to use it. And it doesn't matter what cooker you're using, just know the cooker, because all of them can produce great barbecue, but you got to find something that fits your style and what you're wanting to do.
That's right. And I think sometimes I've fallen into this trap. You start to look at the teams that are doing really well at the upper echelon of competitive barbecue, and I've fallen into this trap early on. We've only been doing this for about 6-8 months, just trying to emulate, certain teams and thinking to myself, okay, I need to get the same kind of cooker they have. And, that's what I need to go with. And you can almost get to the point where you're overthinking it and just not cooking.
Yeah. I mean, that's the name of the game. You're cooking to a feel and tenderness, and you've got to cook enough to learn what that is. And it doesn't matter what the cooker is. You can cook on a pellet cooker, you can cook on a drum, you can cook on a reverse flow or an offset. But just stick with one and learn what it takes to make great meat on that pit.
Right. Sometimes, what do they say? Simplicity is the best way.
Yeah. I mean, I follow the KISS, keep it simple, stupid. And, my processes are very simple, and that way it makes them repeatable, so I can do that week after week.
That's exactly right. No matter where you are. Now, are you going to adjust flavor profiles or timelines based on, let's say, things like, the temperature outside, location of where you're cooking? Do you adjust for that, or do you stay to the process?
I don't adjust my profiles at all.
Okay.
I learned very early on Darren Worth with Iowa Smoky D's. I went up to him at Sonny's Invitational in Florida. And at the time, he was cooking coast to coast, north to south, and just won King of the Smokers in California. And I asked him, I said, how do you adjust your flavors based on where you're at? He says, I don't. He says, good barbecue is good barbecue, and I'm going to beat you with tenderness day in and day out. I cook 4,000 or 5,000 pounds of meat a day in the restaurant. He says, it's what I feel in these hands is where I'm going to beat you. And that was great advice for me early on. So that's, you find a good balanced flavor and you run with it. And until the score sheets tell you otherwise, you don't change it. I cooked alongside Lee Hickle and Phil Breeden and Bill Purvis a lot last year. And yeah, our flavor profiles from Texas to here were different, but it was all good. And we all scored respectively the same.
Mm-hmm. And that's a big key too, I think, again, for those wanting to get into competitive barbecue. You can, fall into the trap of trying to overthink things like I've done. And maybe you did too early on in your journey, Cary, but I think it's to your point, it's good barbecue is good barbecue, and don't overthink it. Stick with what you know and just continue with the process that you already have in place.
Yeah, I mean, you can tweak a few things along the way after 4, 5, 6 cooks, and you go back and reflect over your score sheets and something's not working. You can make a few changes there, but if you're making changes every time you go and cook, you're never going to know what worked and what didn't.
So how many competitions for you? I know you mentioned it was a few competitions, and then, you said, hey, I love this stuff. When did you start winning? Was it a couple of years in? Give me an idea of when you started really hitting your stride.
Well, I started out in GBA, and I guess I went probably within the first year. I started winning some categories, but and making finals. I was making finals regularly, but I didn't win my first grand until 2019 at the Fire Ant Festival. And then after that, I swapped over to KCBS, and I think I won my first grand in KCBS came at cook number 44 or 45, 44, I think it was. And come to find out that the average in KCBS is the first win comes at number 48.
Wow. So you were just under the average.
Yeah. And then you take, I know somebody else that we respectively know, he won in KCBS his very second cook at Boss Hog in Waynesboro.
Wow.
But he's up pushing 40s now and hasn't had another one.
Right.
So
you just never know. You got to cook your cook and let the dust settle as it may, I guess. So,
well, you just got to give yourself opportunities, because sometimes you can't control what happens in the tent.
That is true. That is very, very true. So when you made that switch from the GBA to the KCBS, was it, because I know you said earlier your favorite meat to cook is brisket. Was that a big part of that decision to say, hey, I want to cook 4 meats, I want to cook brisket?
No, mine is, they always call me the barbecue slut, because I go cook anything, anywhere. I was already cooking FBA, cooking GBA, and then I ventured into KCBS and was doing SCA, and then I also got into doing MBN. So I was cooking 4 different associations throughout the year, just because I wanted to go cook and finding stuff that was fairly close to go cook, and that's what I was doing. Then in 2020, I decided I kind of wanted to dial in on KCBS, because I had actually gone down and cooked Moultrie, a GBA event, and I missed my pork turn in, because in my brain I just cooked 5 or 6 straight KCBS, which is chicken, ribs, pork, and brisket. Well, GBA is loin, pork, and then ribs. And my second meat, I'm prepping for ribs, and prepping for pork, or prepping ribs for my second meat, and pork was the next turn in, and I missed the window. And so after that, it was December. KCBS starts at that time in January. So I decided I'd go just cook KCBS and kind of dial in and try to figure out what it took to win there. And 43 comps later, I did.
43 comps. There you go. Now, what are some of the bigger competitions that you've got on the books this year? I know Memphis in May was last week, and I don't think you were there for that. At least I didn't see anything on Facebook. But any other big ones that you're going to?
Well, I cooked in January. I went to San Antonio and cooked the livestock rodeo out there, 298 teams, which is the second largest cook-off in the country, behind the American Royal. Finished in the top 20, 17th overall out there, and that's IBCA, which is chicken halves, 7 ribs, and 7 slices of brisket.
Oh, wow. So they actually dictate the number of slices you have to have.
Right.
Interesting. Okay.
And even on that, the ribs have to be parallel to the hinge in the box.
So you have, interesting. So a little bit different. And the IBCA is the International Barbecue Cookers Association, correct?
Correct.
And they are, and for our listeners, that's pretty much the largest sanctioning body in Texas. Is that right?
It is.
Yeah. That's interesting. And, obviously we don't have much IBCA around here, but it's something I wanted to get into, as well as MBN.
No, but there's a CBA that's in the works coming.
A CBA. Okay. And that's something, what is that? Barbecue. What's the C stand for?
Champions BBQ Alliance out of Texas. It's a growing organization that started 1.5 years ago when the IBCA kicked out a bunch of members, and they started a new organization out of Texas, and it's run by cooks instead of judges, and has a lot of great things, but it's a 4-meat contest instead of a 3-meat.
Interesting. Yeah, that's something we chatted about, I believe, at the Boss Hog Cook-Off a little bit, and that's the Championship Barbecue Alliance. Is that right?
Correct.
Championship Barbecue Alliance. So hopefully they'll have some contests around here, in my area, the Augusta area. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of contests around here. We have the Boss Hog Cook-Off and we have the Banjo BBQ in October, but that's about it. So I'm trying to change that, trying to get one more. So we have 3 a year in this area. So you cook San Antonio. I know you said there was almost 300 teams there. Are you cooking the Royal this year? Do you know yet?
I haven't decided. We cooked Houston Livestock in February, and that was 254 teams. Finaled in brisket out there and finished 17th overall. The Royal I cooked last year, had a ball doing it. But this year, with the cost of fuel, it cost me $2,000 for that trip just in fuel. So I haven't made up my mind about that. I've been talking to some of the sponsors and that kind of thing, and it's in discussion, but we haven't finalized anything yet.
Sure, sure. Yeah, no doubt. And the Royals in the summertime, isn't it?
No, it's in October this year.
October,
Last year it was
okay.
in September. This year it'll be October 1st at Kansas City Speedway.
What's your favorite annual contest to cook? Do you have one?
There's a lot of good ones. One of my favorites is Praise the Lord in Murfreesboro, Illinois in September.
Praise
It's
the Lord.
it's a MBN KCBS duel. It was run by Mike Mills and Amy Mills from 17th Street Barbecue, and Mr. Mike and Pat Burke. There's a lot of history there, and love to support their event. They make it. It's called the Apple City, and they give away these hand-blown glass apples that are second to none. And we were blessed to come away with 2 first-place apples up there the last time we cooked it in 20.
That's awesome. I love that. Well, as we wind down the show, Cary, I know that you are on the road, and so I want to let you get back going so you can get to wherever that is in Sevierville, Tennessee. But as we wind down, for the listeners that are taking this in, that are wanting to get into competitive barbecue, what words of wisdom do you have for them? I know you said earlier that just get in and do it. Anything else that you can impart on them as we wind down?
Yeah, find a meat source that you can source locally and have readily available, and cook the same thing every time you cook, because you'll learn what it takes for that meat, because every producer has a different feed program, so every meat reacts differently in how it's cooked. Mm-hmm. I can pretty much tell you just from experience that if I'm cooking a Smithfield ET rib, I'm probably going to finish it. It's going to finish off somewhere around 204, 205, where a Prairie Fresh Prime might be 211, 212. Just because I know with my experience, but somebody learning doesn't know all that. So you find one brand that you can get consistently, doesn't matter what it is, and just learn to cook it and be good with it. You don't have to go out and spend all this money on high dollar proteins to be able to place.
That's awesome. That is gold right there. So find a local meat source, cook the same meat consistently, understand the meat, understand your cooker. Cary, again, thanks for the time, sir. Enjoyed it. Safe travels to Sevierville, and we'll be in touch soon.
Oh, before we go, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about my sponsors.
Absolutely. Go right ahead.
Atlanta Barbecue Store that keeps me in all my barbecue supplies, Rectech Grills, and Heath Riles Barbecue for sauces and rubs and injections. The Butcher Shop for keeping me in some of the most beautiful A9 briskets you have ever seen. The Sharpening Guy out of Florida that keeps all my knives wicked sharp. That's and right. This year I'm cooking Prairie Fresh pork.
So Prairie Fresh, that Sharpening Guy, Rectech, the Atlanta Barbecue Store. Who else am I missing?
Heath Riles Bar.
That's right. So yeah, all those folks keep Cary going, and definitely, I love Atlanta Barbecue Store myself. I get pretty much all of my stuff from them. So again, Cary, thanks and safe travels. Best of luck this weekend.
All right, appreciate it.